Today on Inside Utah Politics, the needs of children in our state. How will the Utah legislature respond during the upcoming session? A local advocate is here to discuss the top priorities. Plus, cases are on the rise and people are waiting hours to get tested. How the Biden administration plans to address the skyrocketing COVID numbers.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin this morning with Mo Hickey. He is with Voices for Utah Children, here to discuss the biggest needs ahead of the legislative session. Mo, great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
A very important topic. Let's start off with kind of an overall view of how kids are faring here in the state of Utah.
Overall, I would say we're doing okay. We're at Voices right now, we're actually looking into the most recent numbers, which have been delayed, with the census numbers being delayed last year. But overall, I would say we're doing a little better in certain areas than others, but it's been improving.
Okay. Also struggling in certain areas, and we'll dig into those a little bit as we get into the top priorities. But let's start off with optional enhanced kindergarten. That's something you're going to be advocating for this year on Utah's Capitol Hill. Talk about the possibilities and what's on the table there.
Yeah, we're excited about the opportunity. There was funding placed last year during the session, and we're hopeful that we'll be getting increased funding again this year. It's supported by USBA, UEA, the state school board has made it a priority. So what we're looking for this time is to get an actual funding package for the next 3 years, so that every year we don't have to keep coming back and having the discussion. It's an area where we've gotten huge community support. If nothing else during the pandemic, areas like child care and early child care and early child education have been exposed as having needs, and we feel that OEK is one of those areas.
Talk about who's running that bill and your conversations with that representative.
Steve Waldrop will be running the bill, Representative Waldrop, and I think it's really going to turn out being a bipartisan solution. Representative Larry Snow had been a lead champion on this in the past, and he's handed it off to Representative Waldrop, but it's something that I think is bipartisan in nature, and we've had really good support the past couple of years, and we're very optimistic that we can move forward on this.
And talk about the need. How can optional enhanced kindergarten help a child get a strong foundation for the rest of their educational career?
Well, there's the educational component, which is that it's been proven that early childhood intervention on education has a long-term benefit for the child in a number of fashions, both in terms of lack of need for remediation, coming in on grade level in first grade, addressing the needs of the child at that crucial age. In addition to that, what we've seen is a lot of our programs prior to OEK being established were half-day programs, which really started making it very difficult for the families. If you had to drop a child off, come back and pick them up. So for working families, it was a real challenge. We focused on the optional piece because we do understand that there are families that want their child to stay at home until they start first grade. So this is trying to find that proper balance so that their child is the centerpiece of this and getting the support that they need so that they can move into their educational path at grade level.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about how crucial it is to build that foundation early and how that can sustain a child throughout their education. Let's move on to healthcare coverage, another important issue here in the state of Utah, and you're pushing for 100% kids coverage. Talk about what's being done at the Capitol this legislative session to hopefully make that happen.
So again, Utah right now is 46th in the country in child care coverage based on population, and we know we can improve that number. One of the biggest challenges is access to systems that are currently available for the child. So just like we were talking about early child education, the health of the child in those early years is so important. So if we can make sure that every child in the state has access to insurance, that they can get the services they need, it really sets the stage for a thriving childhood and beyond. So Utah was we were the state that founded CHIP. So between CHIP and Medicaid, a vast majority of the 82,000 children that currently do not have insurance would be able to access some form of insurance. So it's a combination of outreach and accessibility to online platforms to sign up and make sure that the children are getting the services that they are eligible for.
Yeah, so we're talking in many instances, as you just mentioned, the children are already eligible, they're just not taking advantage of what is available to them.
Right, and there are barriers, there are structural barriers, there are simple things like more than half of the population of uninsured children live in rural districts, so the question is there Wi-Fi access for parents to sign up? How can they sign up? There was a talk of doing community outreach at some places like Department of Workforce Services offices, which could be helpful in certain places, but if you have to drive 45 minutes in a rural county to get to the DWS office to actually sign up and you don't have access to Wi-Fi. So we want to make sure that we remove as many barriers as possible and find some common sense solutions to make sure that the children have access to the services that they're eligible for.
Okay, another top priority your organization is watching for this legislative session, community health workers. What do you mean by that, and what's the connection to children in this case?
Well, one of the things we found out during the pandemic is that our public health system is lacking in a number of areas. And one of those areas is actually meeting people where they are. So in a lot of our both rural and low-income communities, we don't have hospitals in certain places. We don't have offices that are open on a regular basis. So having community health workers that work with the families across all ages within the family to make sure that they're monitoring their child's health, their behavior, bringing services forward to them, letting them know what services they're eligible for. So the community health worker really covers a lot of vast areas within the family, but it's something that we found has worked well in other places. It's worked well in places in Utah where it is in place, but we don't have enough currently in the state of Utah.
Yeah. One last topic. It's one that's on your agenda every year, it seems, and we're talking tax policy both at the state and federal level. What are you looking at this year?
Well, this is one where we're looking at really a parallel track. On the federal level, we're keeping a close eye on current legislation that has been delayed, and that could have a really serious impact on a lot of areas that affect children in Utah. So there could be funding for childcare, there could be funding for pre-K expansion. We don't know what the timing of that's going to be, but it would affect some of the discussions that are taking place regarding things like childcare in this current legislative session. So we're watching that in a very positive way. On the other side, there have already been 2 bills filed in Utah, one to cut the state income tax from 4.95 to 4.90, and yesterday there was a bill filed to reduce the corporate tax from 4.95 to 4.6. The combined reduction there would be over $100 million on an annual basis at a time when we have a list of unmet needs in the state, not just for children, which are certainly the area we focus in, but we've seen it coming up recently with the homeless population, food insecurity, mental health situations, et cetera. So we strongly this year believe that this is not the right time to be cutting taxes and cutting those necessary services.
All right, we will watch how that all plays out. We of course know the governor would like to see a food tax credit in there as well, so we'll see how that plays out. Mo, very important conversation. Thanks so much for being here and sharing your thoughts this morning.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Still to come, more on the legislative session. Lawmakers from both sides will weigh in on the most important issues. That's a little later in our panel discussion. But first, congressional Democrats are pushing voting reform as a top priority. Republicans, they want to block it. The latest on the battle in D.C. after the break. Welcome back. The Biden administration plans to double its purchase of Pfizer's COVID antiviral pill to 20 million treatments. This comes as the president lays out the next steps in fighting the pandemic. Washington correspondent Rashad Hudson has the latest.
These coming weeks are going to be challenging.
With the country adding a record 1 million daily COVID cases, President Joe Biden is renewing his call for Americans to protect themselves.
If you're vaccinated and boosted, you are highly protected.
To fight the pandemic, President Biden says his administration is also doubling its purchase of Pfizer's COVID antiviral pill to 20 million doses.
These pills are going to dramatically decrease hospitalizations and deaths from COVID-19.
But despite these efforts, U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy says COVID-19 patients are filling up hospitals across the country.
Primarily with people who are unvaccinated.
The Surgeon General says the Biden administration is working on a website to make 500 million at-home COVID-19 tests available later this month.
It's in addition to the federal sites that are started to be set up in December once again and are continuing this month.
And President Biden says a new rule requiring private insurance companies to reimburse people for rapid tests will go in effect next week.
So if you're insured, you can buy the test and get paid for it.
Reporting in Washington, Rashad Hudson.
Democrats say their top priority is this new year is passing national voting legislation. And with Republicans still united against that effort, they say they will now attempt to pass their bills without them. Washington correspondent Raquel Martin reports on the battle to get the measure through as it heats up on Capitol Hill.
We have to keep moving forward.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says this new year, Democrats will take historic steps to pass federal voter protections without Republicans.
Democrats for months have tried to bring Republicans to the table, but every single time, Republicans used the rules of the Senate to prevent even a debate.
Tuesday, he announced Democrats will hold a vote to try and change Senate rules by Martin Luther King Day.
We absolutely are up against the clock.
Right now, Kansas City Mayor Quentin Lucas is one of more than 100 mayors pressuring senators to act.
And this is when we have a chance to say, I think as a country, that you cannot pass any types of bills in the states that are going to eliminate the opportunity for people's voices to be heard.
The challenge for Senate Democrats is not everyone in their party is on board.
That's a heavy lift.
Tuesday, Senator Joe Manchin said he'd rather find a bipartisan solution to protect voter access.
I'm not agreeing to any of this. I want to talk and see all the options.
Meanwhile, Republicans are railing against the proposed change to the Senate rules.
It's called the nuclear option for a reason, because it would ensure that in the future, every Senate that comes in would reverse what the previous Senate has done.
This is genuine radicalism.
Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell says he remains in close contact with Senator Manchin.
We talk to each other all the time.
And believes he will not fold under pressure. In Washington, Raquel Martin.
Still ahead, the 2022 legislative session is about to kick off. What can we expect from Utah lawmakers this year? Our panel weighs in after the break.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to dig deeper into the upcoming legislative session with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Representatives Suzanne Harrison and Jordan Tusher. Welcome to the show, both of you. Glad to have you with us.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you.
Let's get right into it. The session now a little more than a week away. Representative Harrison, let's start with you. What are your thoughts as we get closer and closer?
Well, first off, I'm very grateful for the water that we've been receiving, and I'm also very grateful for Speaker Wilson's leadership on addressing the ever-shrinking Great Salt Lake. We had a summit this week to address that, and I'm very grateful for that leadership and hope to see some robust water conservation bills and some real effort to keep our Great Salt Lake healthy and our other bodies of water healthy.
Representative Tusher, your thoughts?
Well, I think we're going to have a great session coming up. I think the biggest issue that we're going to be tackling is the $1.2 billion surplus that the state has. And as we've talked about it as a House caucus, we've identified 5 major priorities that we want to tackle. First, we want to look at water. You know, how can we better conserve, preserve, and maintain the water that we have in Utah? We want to talk about affordability, making sure that those that live in Utah can continue to live here and their children can afford it. And I think with that comes tax cuts. I mean, we've set aside $160 million towards tax cuts, and I think we could do a little bit more there. The third priority that we have is ensuring that we have a modern education system. So we're going to be looking at ways to modernize that and to bring transparency to the system. And then we want to look at growth, maintaining the growth that we have, making sure that we have infrastructure dollars to support that growth. And lastly, look at generational projects. What can we do that will make a long-lasting impact on our state?
Mm-hmm. All right, so much to dig into with what the both of you just brought up. But first, Representative Harrison, I want to get your thoughts on the tax cuts and what to do with the surplus. Some groups are saying, whoa, slow down. We don't really need tax cuts at this point, maybe funding other projects that could really use the money. Your thoughts there?
You know, Utah has really weathered the pandemic better than almost any other state. We have very low unemployment and a robust surplus. And I am all for tax cuts for low and middle income families. One of the best ways we can help those that are really struggling is cutting the food tax. And I think that's an important step to helping folks that are really, you know, struggling to afford putting food on the table. But in terms of other tax cuts, I think we need to be strategic. We did over $100 million of tax cuts last session, which I voted for and supported to help folks eliminate the burden of taxes on Social Security and helping families with child tax credits. But this year, we need to be strategic, and it's also a year to invest in our kids and their future. We have a chronically underfunded public education system with some of the largest class sizes in the country and a serious teacher shortage and a set of teachers that are very stressed. I think now is the time for tax cuts for those that really need it in lower and middle income families, but then investing in our kids and their future and making sure that we have great jobs for our kids and affordable housing when they grow up and a robust education system.
Representative Tusher, dig into that a little bit, because we've seen bills, proposals to lower the income tax, the corporate tax rate, but should they be more focused, as Representative Harrison suggests?
Well, you know, last session we did very focused tax cuts. You know, we helped our veterans that are living in the state, we helped our families that are living in the state, we helped our elderly and senior citizens that are on that are taking government subsidies. And so I think now's time to have a broad-based tax cut. I think the best way to do that is with an income tax cut. I think we'll look at that, you know, cutting the tax rate across the board. We'll have the most fair cut for everyone that's in the state. But I think one thing that we have to be careful about is not cutting too much. We talk about a $1.2 billion surplus, but right now we're only looking at $200 million of that is ongoing money, and we don't know how much of the surplus is really just dealing with the federal money that is poured into the state.
Mm-hmm. I want to dig a little more into the drought situation. Both of you brought that up as well. The water conservation is really going to be a key priority, and the thing about this is it's bipartisan. Both sides are talking about the need to do this. But let's get more into how you do it. Representative Harrison, what are your thoughts there?
Well, up to now, our water conservation efforts have been somewhat lackluster in Utah, and we really need to step it up, not just at the individual level, but at all levels. We need to invest in agricultural efficiency. We need to look at ways to make sure that we're metering what water we're using and using it efficiently and effectively. And one of the best things we can do is prioritize conservation over, you know, building billion-dollar pipelines that many economists say we really don't need. And those will both help our water situation, but also save taxpayers millions, if not billions of dollars.
Mm-hmm. Representative Tusher, I know you were at the Speakers Summit on the Great Salt Lake during the week. What are your thoughts on taking action on these issues and really doing something that's going to make a difference?
Well, like you said, Glenn, I think we're all united that something needs to be done. Looking at the Great Salt Lake and at the record lows that we're seeing right now, if something isn't done right now, we're going to have very significant long-term impacts. And so I think Representative Harrison talked about a lot of great solutions that we can do. I think it really comes down to land use. How is it being used? What's the long-term plan? How are our local municipalities enacting that to ensure that we're conserving the water that we have? And if we can make those small incremental changes, it will really help us in the long term to solve this problem.
All right, I want to ask both of you this same question. Is there anything on the table, any proposals you've heard that are kind of causing heartburn for you, things that are troubling to you? Representative Harrison.
You know, the biggest thing that I'm concerned about is some of these tax cuts that are across the board that will really only, you know, benefit Utahns to the tune of $3 to $4 a month for the average Utahn, when that money could be used to help address the huge needs in our community. We have a teacher shortage, we have a student aid and paraeducator and student counselor and school psychologist shortage. All of these things are real needs, affordable housing, and I think we need to be strategic. I'm all for tax cuts for lower and middle income families that are struggling, but you know, most or many people in Utah are doing great and they should pay their fair share.
Representative Tusher, anything that you've heard on the table that causes you concern?
Yeah, nothing specific right now. I think the biggest thing that we're looking at is to ensure that we don't add more regulation to our businesses that are struggling right now. They're trying to find people, trying to ensure that they can keep their doors open and deal with the pandemic that we've dealt with. And so we don't want to put more regulation on them. And so that's what I'll be looking at in the bills to ensure that our businesses can stay open.
Okay, I want to ask both of you about a power struggle we saw play out pretty visibly over the last year, and that is this struggle over local authority. What authority do mayors have to act in time of emergency? We saw the Salt Lake City mayor enact a mask mandate, fireworks restrictions, and members of the legislature coming out in both incidents and saying she doesn't have the authority to do that. So does the legislature need to look into that and address that issue? Representative Harrison.
You know, I think often the Utah legislature cries foul if the federal government, you know, asks us to do something, but all too often the legislature tends to meddle in local government. And I think the people closest to the people, those city councilors, those mayors, those school board officials, were elected to do those jobs and have jurisdiction over those issues. And I think we need to respect local control and respect local input.
Representative Tusher, your majority leader is the one that came out vocally against that, saying he wanted to address that. Does it need to be addressed?
I think so. I agree with local control, and I think that that's really important, and we need to emphasize that. But the states and the federal government are not the same as the state and the city. And that's something that's important to remember, that all of the cities and counties are political subdivisions of the state. And so the state's job is to set up those guardrails to protect individual rights. And that's exactly what I think Representative Schultz is going to try to do.
All right, we have about a minute left, 30 seconds for each. Talk to us about what you are personally sponsoring this legislative session. Representative Harrison.
I'm focused on air quality legislation to offer incentives for people to buy cleaner electric vehicles and alternative fuel vehicles, and also to improve people's health. I have legislation to expand access to the National Diabetes Prevention Program. So many Utahns are at risk of developing diabetes, and it's a devastating disease that impacts our health and also the state's fiscal bottom line. Anything we can do to help people be more healthy will help our state budget and help taxpayers as well. I'm also sponsoring legislation to increase the number of school nurses in our schools.
Okay. Representative Tusher, what can we expect from you this session?
Yeah, I've got a few bills, but I think the one that's most important and impactful is dealing with education transparency. How can we ensure that our parents know what's being taught in the classrooms? And so I've got a pretty comprehensive bill that helps bring that out and bring light to the situation so that parents have access to curriculum, they understand that what's being taught, the lesson plans that are there, and really helps everyone in the education system.
That has been a big talker, one I'm sure we will be following. Thank you to both of you so much for your insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now with a look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. The general legislative session begins next week. Can you believe that? State lawmakers will gather at the state capitol on Tuesday, January 18th for opening day. Governor Spencer Cox will deliver his State of the State address a few days after that on January 20th. Make sure to connect with me on social media. I'd like to know what you think of this show and other issues that are important to you. You can email me at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thanks so much for making us part of your Sunday morning. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.